Hi everyone, welcome to chapter 12. Only two more chapters left to the class. We are getting near the finish line. Chapter 12 is a very, very short chapter. I'm just going to cover a little bit of it here. So this will be probably the shortest chapter that we have all semester. But we are going to talk about the arrangement of services and settlements. And so if we look at this sign in Solana Beach, right, you have a Marshalls, a Staples, a Rady Children's office, a credit union, right? How did we decide, or how did they decide what goes in here? Um, how do kind of services get placed throughout the landscape? And so first I'm going to talk a little bit about service industries. They are the tertiary sector of the economy, which I talked about primary and secondary in the last chapter. They exist everywhere, but they are concentrated in more developed countries. So more developed countries, if you look at that map on the top there, the ones that have a darker shade of purple have a higher percentage of their gross domestic product coming from service industries. But they need to exist everywhere, but they are concentrated in MDCs. And they provide most of the jobs in MDCs. And they see the most growth in MDCs as well. Again, this is part of what the last election was about, kind of those primary and secondary parts of the economy lagging behind as that work gets transferred to other countries and those people being upset about that. But it really is the United States and Europe, Australia, South America is kind of up and coming, where you have more and more service industries. They are not possible without primary and secondary industries, right? No one is going to go see the dentist if they aren't making money and if the economy is not doing well, right? You can sell all the automobiles you want in the United States, but somebody has to process the materials for that and put the cars together. But they are consumer services. They include things like retail, education, healthcare, especially, hospitality, and business services such as professional services. Think about like accounting, which is also financial services, transportation, information. Think about things like tech, and then public services like government. So you can see on this San Marcos sign, right? You have some food in here, pizza, pasta, subs, a market. You have mortgage and real estate, orthodontics, a computer place, insurance, income tax, right? Not a lot of stuff being made here. And so, what does this have to do with settlement? Services serve people and businesses. Right, so your customers in the service industry are not just your everyday people, but they're also businesses, and they need a sufficient number of customers. Right, if you place a big box store in the middle of nowhere, it's not going to do very well. Service sector jobs are concentrated in settlements, right? Because not only do they need enough people to serve, but there is a relationship between that settlement size and the services that are available. So, for instance, if you live in San Diego, you have lots of services available to you. If you live pretty far out in East County, less services available to you. You're going to have to drive farther to receive certain services. And the presence of those services then reinforces those settlements, right? Those settlements are less likely to be dispersed because they have the services there that people need, or people will move to those areas for those services. People are more attracted to a place with services, generally speaking. Some people really kind of like to live a more rural lifestyle and have, kind of less businesses around them. But generally speaking, most people don't want to have to drive an hour to get to a hospital or an hour to get to the dentist. Central place theory is a geographic theory that discusses kind of how and why different services exist in certain places. It is a way of thinking about the number and the spacing of settlements. The central place is the market center for exchange of goods and services by people attracted from the surrounding area. And so central place theory uses hexagons. It uses hexagons because if you use circles, they overlap and then you have gaps in between them. Squares do not do that, but you are not really kind of equidistant based upon the distance. So the hexagon is kind of the compromise between the circle and the square. But it gives you the market area for a service. That's the relationship between settlements and services. We refer to something called the range, which is the distance limit from which it attracts customers. That's generally speaking how far somebody is willing to travel for that service. It depends on the service. Some people, you are willing to travel a lot farther for a hospital than you are willing to travel for a McDonald's, unless you really love McDonald's. But that area must also have enough potential customers, right? They have a threshold of the number of customers that they need. So here's the hexagon. This is the market area. Here's the range. Here's how far people are willing to travel for this particular service. And the threshold is the number of people in here. Different services have different thresholds as well. Again, a hospital needs a lot more people to survive than a McDonald's does. So I'm going to talk about different ranges and thresholds. So this drawing here uses central place theory, and these big guys here are cities, and then smaller from the cities is towns, kind of surrounding the town, and then surrounding the town you have villages, which we don't really use the word village, but and then hamlet, right? These are kind of very European terms, but basically you can think about big city, um, larger town, or smaller city even. A village would be a small town, and a hamlet is a place that is really not very populated. So things that have a large range and threshold are big box stores, car dealerships, hospitals. Those are examples of them, right? Generally speaking, people will kind of make a big trip out of going to Costco. They might travel a little farther for it, or if they're going to buy a car, and definitely for a hospital. Hospitals are this very hard thing where a lot of rural hospitals have closed in the United States, forcing people to have to travel really, really far to go to the hospital. But these services are likely only in larger places, right? You're not going to find these places out in the middle of nowhere. Businesses that have a small range and threshold are things like corner stores and gas stations and elementary schools, right? Generally speaking, gas station, because how far could you travel to a gas station before you needed gas, right? But somebody is not going to drive 20 miles to go to a corner store in another town, right? That's serving a much smaller uh, range, and it has a much smaller threshold. So those things are often only seen in small settlements or in neighborhoods, right? So if you think about corner stores in North Park, right, they are serving the people of North Park. So if you look at a more densely populated landscape, this is the coastline in southwestern Connecticut. I grew up in this town of Fairfield, which has about 60,000 people. And we want to look at the placement of shopping malls, right? There's a shopping mall that's near Stamford, which has got 120,000 people. You have one near New Haven, which is where Yale University is, 130,000 people. You have a shopping mall in this town of Trumbull, which is really kind of on the Trumbull-Bridgeport line. But Bridgeport has 145,000 people, and you see how we go down in population outside of Bridgeport. So this is the shopping mall that I would go to. And then, but Danbury is a city, an old manufacturing city, 80,000 people. Notice there's a bunch of space in here with out population numbers. These are generally much less populated places. So this mall is going to have a larger range, excuse me. People are going to be more willing to travel to it. And then if you look at this is from 2009. This is distance to the nearest McDonald's, right? There is fewer McDonald's in less populated places, but there's a lot of McDonald's, right? The range for McDonald's is pretty small, and the threshold for McDonald's is also pretty small. But service businesses use geography to locate where they want to place their businesses, right? They do a lot of research into this. They don't want to place one of their businesses in an area that is not going to have a threshold that can serve them. So they use GIS mapping data, or Geographic Information Systems mapping data, to find potential locations and estimate the range and threshold of the site. And then they predict the market share of each by analyzing the demographics in that area. So for example, here you have, kind of population concentrations. If I was in class, I would ask you to guess what this is. Right here, this the range of this is a lot smaller. So here are Walmarts and here are Whole Foods. Generally speaking, it's a particular type of customer in a particular type of income bracket who is going to want to travel to a Whole Foods in order to shop there, as opposed to a Walmart, which is serving a lot more people. Right? A lot more people of a lot more varied income are going to shop at Walmart. Notice the Walmart up here is less popular, right? As opposed to there's definitely a Whole Foods up here, but it serves a lot of people. There's much more people in their threshold to serve in those areas. When we look at services in developing countries, there are fewer consumer and business services. There are public services and informal economies mostly dominate, right? So there's less service sectors that your kind of average person is going to, but there are these very small or niche roles in the global service economy. So think about offshore financial services, lots of islands. This is Nauru, which is the island of 10,000 banks is registered there because they get a big tax deal to be there. Lots of kind of offshore banking when you hear about that. Outsourcing, things like call centers, particularly in India, where you have fluent English speakers, right? So you can provide that service for cheaper in India for customers in the United States and Europe. And then also tourism, right? So depending on the place, you're going to have basically serving people who are traveling there. And we think a little bit about more tourism. Tourism kind of functions as an export, right? Generally speaking, people are going there and they're spending their money and they're leaving. It is very, very competitive. Most people don't usually go too far. That's called distance decay. So the closer you are to something, the more likely you are to travel there. There are some problems with tourism, including uneven development. So if you go to some of the most kind of posh resorts in Mexico or in some of the Caribbean islands, not that far away, you're going to have people who are living in pretty poor conditions. So you also have this uneven wealth distribution. Also, environmental problems when you have lots of people coming into an area and kind of overwhelming it. And then cultural erosion. So if we look at, I went to Venice about 8 years ago now. Venice, lots of people don't live in Venice anymore. It's been really kind of taken over by the tourism industry. So you have gobs and gobs and gobs of people there who are not Venetian at all. It's certain times of year, it's almost kind of like a theme park. This is another place that I went, Kirka National Park in Croatia, which I can tell you that when I visited those waterfalls, there was a lot more people in them. Or Khao San Road in Bangkok, which is another place that I've been, which mainly serves tourists. So you have these locations that are really serving people from other places and not people who are from there. When we look at tourism in San Diego, we have 26 million annual visitors. It gives $5.6 billion a year to our economy. It is the third largest industry in our county. Tourism is really important to San Diego. We have the perfect climate. We have great beaches, lots of attractions. People call it the climate-controlled city, although in the day that I'm recording this lecture, it is very warm. It's close to Asia, right? So if people are coming from Asia, they're more likely to visit the west coast of the United States, and it's also really close to Mexico. We have lots of people crossing the border every day from Mexico to spend money in San Diego. We tend to think of it in the other direction, but lots of people come from Mexico to spend money in San Diego. We have Comic-Con every year. In addition, which every couple of years I feel like they threaten to kind of pull out of San Diego due to space, and San Diego lobbies to keep them. Comic-Con is big business for all the businesses that are downtown. And that is the end of this very short chapter. You're going to move on to chapter 13, which is all about urban patterns, and that'll be the last chapter for the class.